Howdy, y'all. Biking sucks and is terrible. Perhaps I should clarify. I actually love biking. It's one of my favorite hobbies. I do it all the time. It's fun, a good workout, and it makes my calf muscles do this. But there's a major factor that often makes it more terrifying than fun. And that's how our entire biking infrastructure is just lazily slapped onto our car infrastructure with little to no care for the safety of pedestrians. To illustrate this point, we're going to take a look at my favorite bike route, the 70-ish mile trip to OwOsso, Michigan. There's a lot to love about this route. The scenery is gorgeous, there's a ton of cool landmarks, it has OO in the name, and once you get there, there's a Chinese buffet that does takeout by weight, so you can get a pound of sushi for like $7. Is it good sushi? No, not at all, but for $7, I'm not complaining. But before you can sink your teeth into potential food poisoning, you have to deal with the ride there. And, well, there's some problems.
To start off, let's talk about the bike lanes. Now, bike lanes, even when they're decent, are still kind of a weird concept in my opinion. You have these cars cruising by at 50 miles an hour right next to a person with no protection besides hopefully a helmet, going maybe 15? And as the cyclist, you just have to hope that every single driver stays solidly in their lane and doesn't hit you. And that's the best case scenario most of the time, because there's plenty of places where the bike lanes look like this. Maybe 3 inches of asphalt and then just a gravel shoulder. Nobody likes to drive on gravel. It's prone to developing bumps and having large rocks that aren't fun to bike over, and can make it difficult to avoid crashing. Not to mention, the looseness makes turns far more difficult. I've crashed my bike exactly 3 times in the past year, and all 3 have been from trying to turn on gravel. But roads like these make gravel the only option for cyclists. And sometimes you don't even get gravel. Take this road, where they've gone ahead and painted the line for the bike lane, but the actual space where the bike lane should be is a ditch. You'll notice I'm driving on the left side of the road in this clip. This is illegal and dangerous. Genius physicists, or those who learned Newton's laws in middle school, will know that a crash is far more likely to cause injury if we're going opposite directions. But biking with the flow of traffic, especially on roads with little to no lane, requires you to put so much faith in those driving. Let's take a look at this clip, where 50 feet out from me, the motorist is still driving on the bike lane line. Because I see this, I can preemptively get over to the shoulder for safety. The driver eventually shifts over, but I've seen plenty of others who haven't.
So when you want to bike, you get a choice. Increase your injury severity and break the law, or put your safety in the hands of countless strangers zooming past you, a not insignificant amount of whom are going to be driving distracted. Both of these options suck. Bikers are also affected even more so than cars by the conditions of the road. Bikes have smaller tires and travel at slower speeds, so a pothole that a motorist might not even feel could mess up a biker's whole day. Cyclists need high-quality roads in order to travel more than cars do, but bike lanes are routinely the worst parts of the road.
Because they're at the edges, bike lanes tend to degrade much faster than the center of the road. And they also generally see much less maintenance, which compounds the issue. Potholes on the road suck, but they do tend to get patched eventually. Meanwhile, there's sections of bike lane which never get a lick of maintenance. When bikers have to regularly swing over into the main road due to poor conditions in the bike lane, that creates a lot of opportunities for crashes. Consistently, the worst places for the pavement eroding and causing a hazard for bikers is these turns out of parking lots. I'm not exactly sure why they're always so bad. My current theory is that cars take turns too sharply and dig up the gravel. But whatever the reason is, they always suck. And I'm mainly bringing them up because when I was 13, one of these turn divots nearly got me killed. I was turning out of a parking lot, got my wheel caught in the divot, and fell headfirst into the street. If it had happened like 3 seconds later, my head would have gotten squished by a pickup truck. Speaking of pickup trucks, they're another part of why biking has gotten more dangerous over time. American car manufacturers have been steadily trending towards larger and larger cars. Big old pickups like the Ford F-150 and massive SUVs. These cars have larger blind spots, which increase the likelihood of a crash. They're taller, which means anyone hit is more likely to go under the car rather than over it, making death or serious injury much more likely. And they're wider, which means that they're even more nerve-wrackingly close when they drive by. And it's even worse when semi-trucks or buses drive by. I swear, those things give off such a strong gust of wind when they pass you, it's hard to even stay upright sometimes.
Biking is also made stressful by the sheer inconsistency of what you get to bike on. If you're driving a car, outside of maybe some minor changes for stuff like U-turns, you generally drive the same no matter where you are in a country. And at the very least, you know you're always driving on the road. But for bikers, you may have to drive on a sidewalk, a bike lane, a gravel shoulder, a trail, and the road all in one trip. And unless you're familiar with the route, these changes can be jarring. I popped a tire a few months back because the bike lane suddenly gave out and I was forced into the gutter, where I ran over a windshield wiper. If I had known the bike lane was going to disappear, I could have gotten up onto the sidewalk. But indications for when bike lanes start and end tend to be a luxury rather than the norm.
Perhaps nothing illustrates how our biking infrastructure is a second thought to our car infrastructure more than intersections. This is where the majority of bike crashes occur, and it's not hard to see why. Intersections are regularly devoid of facilities to accommodate pedestrians, like crosswalks, bike boxes, and walk signs. Even when these are present, it's very clear that the primary goal of intersections is facilitating the movement of cars first and pedestrians second. What you're watching here is my kryptonite. An intersection on the way to OwOsso that takes maybe 45 seconds at the longest to get through by car, but on foot, it takes 4 whole minutes to get through. When it's so inconvenient for pedestrians to safely cross the street, we can't be that surprised when people wind up jaywalking and getting hurt.
And outside of the structural issues with our biking infrastructure, there's a lot of elements of biking that are just kind of annoying. For one, you tend to get yelled at fairly regularly. You don't even have to be doing anything. There's been plenty of times where I've been pulled off to the side of the road to check my phone or something, and someone just screams out of their car as they drive by. I can't even tell what they're saying, to be honest. I mean, nobody sounds coherent going by you at high speed. And the roadkill. This is another big issue when you bike in rural areas. I'm not going to show it on YouTube because it's gross, but I can barely go a mile without passing some festering corpse most of the time. The animals have an uncanny habit of winding up directly in the bike lane too, instead of on the actual road where they were presumably hit. I feel weird whining about this too much, because I mean, clearly the possum is having a much worse day than I am. But like I've already said, having to swerve into the main road to avoid hazards is dangerous. I'd rather not become roadkill because I was trying to not run over roadkill. Also, nobody respects right-of-way laws, and in a lot of areas where pedestrians are less common, people don't even bother to check for bikers. I was crossing the street once, and a pickup truck just rammed into me because they didn't bother checking for anything other than their ability to turn, not even if there was a person directly in front of them. Now, Alex, I hear you say, you've talked a lot about what makes biking suck, but I didn't click on this video just to hear some weirdo with, frankly, stunning calves whine. What are the solutions? Well, first off, thank you. But secondly, while I'm not gonna lie, I did mostly make this video to serve as catharsis for me. There is a lot that can be done to make biking safer, more enjoyable, and more accessible. Now, in an ideal world, we would completely overhaul the whole way we do transport in the US, make public transport far more ubiquitous and accessible, build trains, trams, and trolleys, create bus routes and on-demand ride services in rural areas to address the needs of the million or so rural households that don't have a car, which happen to be in the area you absolutely need a car under the current system. And then we'd use the space created by that to establish two-way bike lanes with a buffer zone and bike-friendly intersections on every road in the country. However, I don't think this plan is the most realistic. Not because it's unrealistic to overhaul our system so dramatically, so quickly. We can absolutely do that if we want to. People tend to operate on extreme short-term memory when it comes to our existing institutions, as if because this is how we've done it for 100 years of 10,000 years of recorded history, it's the only possible way to do things. No, we could absolutely rapidly overhaul our transportation infrastructure, much in the same way we did with the emergence of the automobile. But two things stand in the way. Firstly is the political and cultural opposition. We live in a country where one of the two parties is seemingly opposed to doing anything good ever, and the other party is, to put it very nicely, not as effective at making good things happen as I would like them to be. And in the populace at large, there's a lot of sentiments about the value of individualism and American car culture, which means many will see any efforts towards a system that favors public transportation over cars as an attack on them personally. There's also some lizard brain type issues too. The trend towards larger and larger vehicles exists because people tend to feel more safe the bigger their car is. Public transportation options, even if they are objectively safer ways to get around, don't confer the same feeling of security as what essentially amounts to your own personal tank. The second issue with massive overhaul is that, while it has happened in the past, it mostly only occurs when that overhaul is tied to a profit motive. The expansion of the roadways was spurred by the booming auto industry. The expansion of rail lines was driven by profit too. This holds true even going past just transport. Our shift from coal to oil as the predominant fuel source was in no small part due to oil just having a greater earnings potential. The driver of massive change in a capitalist system is always profit. Social good alone is not enough. We've seen that in the past few decades with climate change. Making public transportation effective and accessible to every American poses an undeniable social good, but it unfortunately is directly opposed by the profitable institutions that are the auto and petroleum industries. If we want to completely overhaul our transport system, we're going to need to completely overhaul our economic system first. Okay, this video's anti-capitalist tangent quota has been satisfied. Now, can anything be done to make biking better without abolishing unjust hierarchies first? Absolutely. In fact, many cities are already implementing better bike lanes across America. If you go to cities like Detroit, Ann Arbor, or Lansing, there are areas with new, high-quality bike lanes built in the past couple of years, and those are just the ones I've personally ridden on. Bike share systems, where people can rent a bike for a little bit and then turn it in at a station elsewhere, are being implemented in some cities too. And while I'm not crazy about the business model, they can help provide transport to people, and they're objectively much better than those stupid fucking electric rental scooters that always wind up blocking the sidewalk. And there are developments in the works to adjust cars to better accommodate pedestrians, by hopefully making them kill pedestrians less. One of the provisions in Joe Biden's infrastructure bill alters the safety rating system used for cars to take into account safety towards pedestrians, which they didn't do previously for some reason, as well as calling for the Department of Transportation to develop standards for car bumpers and hoods that aim to reduce pedestrian fatalities. Again, this feels like something that really shouldn't be happening for the first time right now, but it'll do something at least. But there's certainly improvements that will need to be made to these systems. While new lanes have already been constructed, plenty of the area within the cities they're being built in remains unserved by bike lanes. And even if they are, the system might be inconsistent throughout the city, as is the case in Portland, Oregon. Changing the way cars are built is a good thing, but just because you build better cars doesn't mean that the old ones go away. It'll be at least a decade after the improved designs are introduced before the old ones fall out of circulation. And within that time, the regulations might be lifted. Donald Trump already stopped a previous attempt at these safety measures kicked off by the Obama administration. Who's to say that the next Republican president, maybe even literally Donald Trump, won't do the same for the Biden administration's plan? And another shortcoming of these developments is that they're taking place almost exclusively within cities. This isn't surprising. Cities are the places that have the largest demand for better biking infrastructure due to their greater population density. But we've seen that more rural bike routes are consistently the most poorly implemented and the most poorly maintained. Due to the relatively lower demand, it may be hard to justify full-on barrier and all quality bike lanes. And I get that. But we do need to approach road construction with pedestrians in mind. And we can't leave rural America behind.
At the very least, all roads should have an actual pavement bike lane, as opposed to gravel or literally nothing, with an actual painted line marking it as such, that actually receives maintenance when the rest of the road does. If we want to splurge, we can put in some rumble strips too, so cars aren't drifting over into the bike lane as often.
Additionally, we should look into building more bike trails along the routes of freeways. Bikes are prohibited or discouraged on freeways across much of the United States. And even in places where they're allowed, biking on the interstate is actually fucking terrifying. But freeways do tend to connect cities in the most direct fashion. And by building trails following the same routes as freeways, like the I-275 Metro Trail here in Michigan, the C-470 in Colorado, and the I-5 in Oregon, you can connect population centers for people who don't have a car. You might say, this isn't worth the investment, Alex. Literally no one is going to use it except for you. And while I will cede that I'm probably still going to be the only person biking 70 miles to OwOsso for cheap sushi, I'll be far from the only person using the improved bike lanes. For starters, I'm already not the only person biking in these areas. It's not that common, but I do see other pedestrians on occasion. And that's without any bike lanes. In a shocking turn of events, when biking becomes more easy and safe, more people are going to bike. Also, we shouldn't forget that better biking infrastructure makes things better for drivers too. More bikers means less cars on the road, which improves traffic. And if I hate swerving to avoid roadkill, you know that drivers hate swerving to avoid me just as much. I know the instant reaction to any major infrastructure proposal is, well, how are we going to pay for it? And the answer is fucking taxes, obviously. Like, that's how societies generally do things. Did you not learn basic civics concepts in school? If you didn't, maybe it's because your school was underfunded in favor of tax cuts. But for real, while I'm writing this, Elon Musk is tweeting about how his TikTok dancing robot is going to have a catgirl variant. This man does not need $200 billion to fund his midlife crisis. But investment in biking infrastructure also helps to pay for itself in many ways. It drives tourism, reduces CO2 emissions, and improves health. And the savings generated by the infrastructure put in place in high traffic areas can help to offset the losses of infrastructure set up in lower traffic areas. Because, maybe the government shouldn't be run like a business, and we should be fine spending money on a good thing sometimes. Bike routes shouldn't have to be justified by whether or not they generate enough economic activity to make a return on investment. Many do, and that's good. But not doing so shouldn't mean we don't build a bike route. Biking is allowed to just be a fun thing to do. And that experience shouldn't be denied to you just because you don't live in a city.
Biking is one of my favorite hobbies, and it sucks. But it doesn't have to. We have the resources and the knowledge to make biking great. All we need is the political will to make it happen. We have a long road ahead of us. But if we keep pushing, we can get there. And when we do, the end result will be worth the cost. Like, comment, and subscribe. A special thank you to my lovely patrons who should be scrolling by in the credits right about now. If you want to join them here, you can give me money on Patreon. The link for that is in the description. They help me afford stuff like the cool new clip mic you can see me using in this vid, and the repairs to my bike that I had to get because, ironically, I fucked up my bike while filming this. So thank you. I have brake pads that actually work now.
Hi, so I know it's a Chinese buffet, but allow me to introduce you to the most American food ever made. This is peanut butter fried chicken. It's chicken that was fried and then doused with peanut butter. And it's great. I love it. A bit of it fell down several stories, but so good. This is worth the near death and 70 miles